And I think that's important that we do that.
And there would be one, I will go back to that one slide where we look at the 2-week incident rate and repeat that. But everything that we're showing you will be available to the public and to the media.
Right.
In fact, it's probably available to the media right now, simultaneous to our discussion.
Can we take questions while we're waiting, or we need to wait to do that too?
I would just wait, Mr.
Okay.
Lewis, until we're
Okay.
live and that everyone can hear everything that we're discussing.
Okay.
So we don't have to repeat the questions.
Ms. Leventis Wells, are we gonna plan to stick to this, since we're doing a live feed and all that, are we gonna try to stick to a 9 to 11 scheduled time?
Well, it would be nice, but I cannot, I will not limit our time in case there are valid questions that need to be asked by other board members. I mean, it would be nice if we could stick to 9 to 11, but if we go over, then I'm not gonna cut people off. I will ask that you not repeat questions, but if you have valid questions, then I think everything needs to be answered today.
Hello?
Mr. Sudeth.
I think it is, isn't it?
I'm going to try and text Mr. Sudeth and tell him that he's on.
Can you mute him?
We're live right now.
Nancy, I can see you on the screen. I hope that I'm getting through with my voice. All right.
Maybe want to reiterate
I heard him.
all of that
Did you hear me?
I don't think any of it
Okay, Mr. Sudeth, why don't you say something now?
should be.
All right, just to make sure that people who weren't able to hear this initially can hear it now. I want to go back to the slide that is new information. We went over initially the DHEC categorization for how they define spread, which was simply a review of what we talked about in our previous meeting. The chart that you have in front of you shows our plot of the DHEC spread using their metric for the last 4 reporting periods. And again, their reporting period is a 2-week look back, and they refresh that reporting period weekly so that each week you're getting a new week 2. So we see a positive trend here, although in the left column, we still show the incidence rate per 100,000 at being high as per the DHEC definition. And we show the 2-week average of positive tests as being high as well. What is positive, however, though, is in both of those categories. In the new incidents, we've gone from 500 to 431.5 to 333.5. In the percent positive, we've gone from 18.9 to 17.8 to 15.4 in this reporting period, which moves their center definition, that is the 2-week incident trend, from high to medium to low, moving it from increasing to stable to decreasing. We believe that's a key to show that we have improving conditions in our community, and some of the actions that people in the community are taking are having a positive effect on improving the numbers. So we move from that to just a little review of the Accelerate Ed Task Force recommendations, where they defined traditional as a scenario where there's a low to no spread in the area and low to no positive cases within the school building. A hybrid most likely would be used when there is a medium spread and a medium number of positive cases within the school building. And then all virtual will be utilized when there is a high spread in the area and high numbers of positive cases within the school building. Again, the Accelerate Ed recommendations, this is the exact wording from those recommendations. So they're not tied directly with a DHEC definition, because at the time Accelerate Ed wrote these recommendations, DHEC had not yet defined low, medium, or high. And that's important to keep in mind as we move forward. Within our plan, within our framework, and what we will ask the board to vote on later in this meeting is for the administration to operate within the framework that's laid out in this slide. In an incidence of low spread, as defined by DHEC, that would be low across each of those categories, we to follow attendance plan 2 or 5. The medium spread, we would follow attendance plan 1 or 2. In a high spread, we would follow attendance plan 0 or 1. In each case, we would be looking at individual numbers inside those structures, inside those plans, most particularly looking at were we in a positive trend, a downward trend, or a stable trend, which would then help us inform our decision as to whether it's a 0 or a 1 in high, a 1 or a 2 in medium, or a 2 or a 5 in low. We'd also be looking at reports of positive tests within a building. That would also be part of what would inform our decision inside that framework. This is some notes about those frameworks. It really simply says that there might be exceptions within that. For example, we could be in a 1, but we might have special education classes meeting 2 times a week instead of 1 time a week. We might be in a 0, but we might have very small groups coming in and doing certain things. For example, we use there a small group of welding students might be in a lab for hands-on instruction. They might be in a 2,000 square foot lab and there'll be 3 or 4 of them in there with an instructor appropriately socially
No, ma'am. I don't think
doing the part that they need to do
right now.
that can't be done, reasonably can't be done virtually. So those are some exceptions. So even within
Everybody doing fine, thank you. Appreciate the call.
Work.
that,
Dr. Royster,
All right, bye-bye.
Dr. Royster,
yes, ma'am.
may I interrupt?
Yes,
Mr. Suddeth, every time you're on your phone, we can hear your conversations. Okay? Just an FYI.
I will
All right,
mention it again.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Royster. Go ahead.
May I mention, this is Roy. Burke, I think we're still having problems with the audio for the public. I've had several texts, and my wife is trying to watch it on her phone, and she's not able to hear any of the audio. So I just want to pass that along to you.
What happened, the original link got cut off, so they will actually have to go to the GCS Webmaster YouTube channel until Mike Simmons, our webmaster, gets that.
All right, to make certain they're on the current link, they need to go to our GCS website, YouTube channel, and they'll be able to access it.
I'll ask, since my wife's listening to, I'll ask her when she's able to get it to make sure we're all stuck together.
It's there.
On the YouTube, on the website, on the YouTube channel.
GCS website, our YouTube channel, and it's live there.
Okay.
And you're looking at that right now, Jim?
I was not. I can if you want me to.
Make sure.
I can pull it up.
It's on the front page.
Yes, it's been confirmed it's there. All you have to do is log into it.
Okay.
I got there straight from.
Okay. She says it's working.
Okay. All right. All that we have here are simply some exceptions where we might follow in general terms in the district, we might be on a 1 or a 2 or a 0, but we could have some exceptions to that, assuming that we have in place the appropriate safety protocols. We did some of this last spring when we were closed down with very small groups. It also notes that we would try to give a 5-day calendar notice to the community before we change from one plan to another. That's particularly important, I think, moving from a less restrictive or from a less restrictive to a more restrictive environment, but it's important in any kind of shift. And absent some dramatic swing in data, we would want to give a 5-day notice to our community. We have also said it is our intent, based on whatever the board might approve today, for us to announce 2 weeks before the planned start date of school for students what plan we would open under, to give parents 2 weeks notice that, again, absent some dramatic swing. And you know, we have seen that. We've seen that immediately after Memorial Day. We saw it immediately following the 4th of July. But assuming there is not a dramatic swing, we would want to announce to our community 2 weeks before the start of school. All right. Extracurricular activities, a link to the number of days of attendance and outlined in the destination return to school plan. Under attendance plan 0, it's unlikely extracurricular activities would be permitted. If it's not safe to be in school in person where you can be socially distanced, it is unlikely those activities would be safe to be participating in. However, under attendance plans 1, 2, and 5, extracurriculars will resume following noted protocols, and those might vary from activity to activity. And just to give an example, there's been a fair amount of research done about chorus, and the research indicates that the travel of the droplets for someone singing could be as much as 12 feet. So 6 feet of social distancing in a group where singing is occurring is not sufficient. So that's just a single example. And there might be very different examples for each type of extracurricular activity, whether that's baseball or football or chorus or band or ROTC or any other activity. Some of the safeguards will be unique to those activities. All right, instructional contingency plans for students with disabilities. During periods of mandatory school closure or during periods when students are unable to attend in-person schooling due to quarantine related to COVID-19, students with disabilities will continue to receive a free, appropriate public education. Students will receive special ed services through an e-learning model or blended model as outlined in an instructional contingency plan, which is developed for each individual student. Teams must use any and all relevant data to generate the content for each student's instructional contingency plan. I think that answers, there were several questions about extracurriculars, and I believe that answers those. Basically, they're simply directly tied to being under plans 1, 2, and 5 at this point. This is a reminder of the CDC guiding principles related to risk. We need to pause for a minute. We've lost our live feed.
Dr. Royster, when we go live again, could you highlight athletics, the scenarios where athletics will resume? I know that Ms. Fitzer has put up 1, 2, and 5, but we're getting lots of questions in reference to that specific. I know you brought it in with the course and extracurricular activities, but could you really address that one for us, please, when we
Yeah.
go live? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Sorry, the link has been reestablished, again, going back to the GCS webpage and the YouTube channel through our webpage. Mrs. Leventis Wells had asked me to go back over again or reemphasize athletics. And right now in our plan, athletics as well as other extracurricular activities are tied to us being in school in person. So it could be plan 1, 2, or 5. Any of those plans, we would move forward with extracurricular activities. Now, subject to certain protocols that would have to be in place to protect individuals involved, both the participants and the coaches, sponsors, and directors, and particularly related to athletics, subjects to the rules and decisions of the South Carolina High School League. So hopefully that clarifies that. If we're in person in school in any number of days, athletics will resume. All right, the CDC guiding principles, and they're very similar to the DHEC. The lowest risk is where when they're only virtual. That's the lowest risk, obviously. There is a little more risk when you have small in-person classes, activities, and events. Groups of students stay together and with the same teacher throughout across school days, and groups do not mix. Students remain at least 6 feet apart and do not share objects. And in every one of our plans except a 5, we are able to do all of those things, except in a 5, we cannot maintain 6 feet apart. It is not physically possible inside our classrooms and our buildings. It's not possible to maintain 6 feet in a 5 all day long. The elementary level, obviously those students would be together. At the middle and high school level, they are cohort grouped by color assignment. But at the middle and high school level, it is not possible to keep them in the same room every day, all day long. It is impossible at the high school level because they take varying courses. There's no way to put them in a room and move teachers from room to room at the high school level. The middle school level, you can leave them in the same room and rotate the teachers for some of their courses. But for other courses, everyone in a team may not necessarily take the same math, for example. And then the highest risk is full-size in-person classes, activities, and events. Students are not spaced apart. They share classroom materials or supplies, and they mix between classes and activities. Good. CDC guidance for schools. Administrators should make decisions in collaboration with local health officials based on a number of factors, including the level of community transmission, whether cases are identified among students, teachers, or staff, what other indicators local public health officials are using to assess the status of COVID-19, and whether student, teacher, and staff cohorts are being implemented within the school. All right, this continues the CDC guidance. No to minimal community transmission, minimal to moderate community transition. I won't read through all of those things. If there is substantial controlled transmission, significant mitigation strategies are necessary. These include following all the actions listed above and also ensuring that student and staff groupings and cohorts are as static as possible with limited mixing of student and staff groups. Field trips and large gathering and events are canceled and communal spaces are closed. And you'll see those are components of our plans. All right. And you'll notice in there, we have each of those things: proper ventilation within school facilities, maintain cleaning and disinfecting procedures, cohorts, limited mixing of staff. All of those things are present in our plans. All right, if there is substantial uncontrolled transmission, schools should work closely with local health officials to make decisions on whether to maintain school operations. The health, safety, and well-being of students, teachers, staff, and their families is the most important consideration in determining whether school closure is a necessary step. Again, they're talking about substantial uncontrolled transmission. Though in my line of thinking, in the vernacular, I believe, it would be the numbers are high and they're going up. To me, that indicates substantial and uncontrolled transmission. All right, DHEC guidance. Very similar to CDC guidance. To the extent possible, maintain at least 6 feet of distance between each person. We can do that in all of our plans except attendance plan 5. Avoid students congregating in common areas. You see that throughout our plans. Limit people present to only students and essential faculty and staff. You see that in there as well. Social distancing. Avoid assemblies or other congregate events. Encourage frequent hand washing with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Soap and water not available. Hands are not visibly dirty. Use an alcohol-based sanitizer that contains at least 60% alcohol, of which we have a gallon of that in every classroom in the district. We'll have when school starts. We already have it in the warehouse. Strongly encourage faculty and staff to wear masks or cloth face coverings as much as possible. Consideration may be given to recommending them for students. You'll note, and you've seen in our plan, that at any point, 6 feet of social distancing cannot be maintained. Masks are required from 3rd grade up and for all adults at all times, unless you can maintain the 6 feet of social distancing. Bus transportation. Drivers and other staff must wear face masks, and all students have to wear a mask on the bus. For one reason, that passing by the driver when they are within probably 2 to 3 feet of the driver. And the capacity change from 50% to 67% puts them closer together in seating on the bus. Now, under our Plan 1 and Plan 2, we would likely not be at 67% on the buses. We would be closer to 50% than 67%. It gives you there, that translates on a 72 passenger, that's 48 students, and it has a minimal impact on a 30 passenger special ed bus. We would be able to transport all secondary and most primary in one run each. Again, that's for Plan 1 and Plan 2. We have assigned seats as part of our plan, and our plan loads the bus from back to front and disembarks the bus when it arrives at school from front to back to minimize the opportunity to pass by one another at a close distance. COVID-19 in children. There is a lot of information out there about this. New information is added every day. The majority of information reflects that children, very young children, can develop COVID-19. Many times they don't have symptoms. They get sick, they tend to experience milder symptoms, low-grade fever, fatigue, and cough. Some children have had severe complications. This is much less common. Children with underlying health conditions may be at increased risk for severe illness. And a complication that has more recently been observed in children can be severe and dangerous, called multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, can lead to life-threatening problems with the heart and other organs in the body. The best data that exists so far comes from a large South Korean study published earlier this month, contact tracing of 5,700 COVID-19 patients. Researchers found that students under the age of 10 spread the virus at about half the rate of adults, but kids between 10 and 19 spread it at a similar rate as adults. The findings out of South Korea comport with those of other smaller studies from France, Iceland, and China. Another big unknown is whether children who are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic can spread the virus. The aforementioned South Korean study only traced the contacts of symptomatic children. A study of children and adults with mild to moderate COVID-19 found that young children under 5 years old have equivalent or more viral nucleic acid in their upper respiratory tract compared with older children 5 to 17 and adults. While this is not evidence of disease transmission, young children can potentially be drivers of SARS-CoV spread in the general population. Again, you see the sources quoted there. This from the CDC. There's mixed evidence about whether returning to school results in increased transmission or outbreaks. For example, in Denmark, they reported a slight increase in cases in the community after reopening schools and child care centers for students between 2 and 12, and followed by steady declines in cases among children ages 1 and 19. In contrast, in Israel, they experienced a surge of new cases and outbreaks in schools after reopening, and I think this is the most important component to what happened in Israel, and relaxing social distancing measures. It is unclear what caused the increase in cases and what other mitigation measures the schools had implemented. But it seems to me the big thing missing there was they were no longer social distancing. In the summer of 2020, Texas reported more than 1,300 COVID-19 cases in child care centers. However, twice as many staff members had been diagnosed as children, suggesting that children may be at a lower risk of getting COVID-19 than adults. University of Texas, this is some information that just came out this past week. There is a COVID-19 modeling consortium at the University of Texas that developed a framework that uses community prevalence of COVID-19 to determine the risk of the virus being introduced in any school. And it will predict this down to the county in the state. So the model predicts that in Greenville County, South Carolina, in a pod of 10, now if you think about a pod of 10, you're really talking about the way we have elementary set up. They come in, they stay with that group, they're with them all day, they have interaction, but it's 6 feet apart in the group they're in. They're staggered coming in, they stagger, they're going out. A pod of 10, 0 infected people would be expected to arrive in the first week. In a school of 100, 1 infected person would be expected to arrive in the first week. In a school of 500, 4. In a school of 1,000, 9. Again, a pod of 10 is larger than the maximum class size under attendance plan 1. And that would hold true for elementary, middle, and high school under a plan 1, the class size. There is some movement at middle and high school. The most at high school, the less at middle school. Because again, you can't keep those students in the same room. They have different and varying schedules. Again, the source of that is the University of Texas. You can click on that link and pull that information at any time that you'd like to look at that yourself. Here are COVID cases. You'll see that this is similar to what we shared with you 2 weeks ago. By age group in South Carolina, you see the percents there as reflected by the age group. Reported COVID deaths by age group, you see the percentage there. Again, this is South Carolina specific information provided by DHEC using the categories that they use. You see the ages across the bottom. This is a reminder, we shared this with you earlier, which correlates our employees with their age bracket, which lines up with the DHEC report. So you see that we have 20% of our employees that are 61 or over. These are all employees, not just teachers, bus drivers, custodians, clerks, principals, assistant principals, district staff, whoever they might be. We have 20% 61 and older, and 24% 51 and older. Here's a similar breakdown for our substitute teachers. You see the percentages there. Again, information we shared with you previously. Don't believe any of those numbers have changed appreciably, though as we continue to employ teachers and other employees, it could shift those age categories to a degree, but probably not appreciably. All right, parent options. Our parents have two options. One, a traditional program, where our objective is to return to 100% in-person education every day of the week. But our schedules could shift among 100%, hybrid, 1 and 2 days a week, and 0% based on public health conditions. In that case, students remain with their teachers, whatever that schedule is. Once we've established that class, absent, illness or something happening with a teacher, they would stay with those teachers. All right. The other parent option is the virtual program. 100% e-learning. There is no variation in the schedule. You've seen those schedules. We've shared them with you. And there are dedicated teachers at the elementary and middle school level. And at the high school level, there may well be some dedicated teachers, but there are also teachers who might be teaching a regular in-person class first period and a virtual class from their room at the high school second period. And they may alternate that some during the day. And we have a very few situations in courses that have very small enrollments where the teacher may be teaching dually during a period, maybe teaching in person and live streaming their class. We don't do that in every case because we don't have the technical broadband width to do that live streaming, and it becomes quite a challenge for a teacher with a larger class. These tend to be smaller, but you might think of there might be AP classes, very small enrollment classes, both virtually and in person. All right, really just a reiteration of the traditional program, parent option 1. And this is looking again at our destination return to school, our roadmap, 0 days, 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, and the correlating groups that align to the days of attendance. Protocols for attendance plans 1, 2, and 5. Proper use of masks and gloves. Modeling the behavior we want to see. Videos and presentations. Tools to reinforce hygiene and infection control. Signage throughout the building. Reminders of hygiene and infection control measures. Hand washing. Social distancing. Directional arrows. Respiratory etiquette. Daily reminders by teachers, administrators, and nurses. Review mask requirements, social distancing, hand washing, etc. Hand hygiene, hand washing 20 seconds with soap and water after bathroom, before meals, and after recess. This is across all plans. Hand sanitizer, only if soap and water are not readily available. Rub hands together to completely dry. Strategically placed throughout the building. That is in every classroom and at other locations in the building. Classroom teacher to monitor the use, especially by younger students. Respiratory etiquette. The main way for the virus to spread is by respiratory droplets released when people talk, cough, or sneeze. Cover coughs and sneezes, preferably with tissue, then wash hands. Avoid touching face with hands. And being masked at any point, you can't maintain social distance. Symptom screening, all staff daily symptom screening upon arrival. Students monitored for symptoms of COVID-19 at home before boarding a bus or entering school, and encouraged to stay home if ill. There's no penalty for staying at home if you're ill. We'll work with that family to make up those, whatever work they might have missed. Social distancing in plans 1 and 2. Keeping a distance of 6 feet is one of the best tools that we have to decrease the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing limits the opportunities to come into contact with COVID-19 with those droplets. Protocols for attendance plans 1, 2, and 5. Mask. Students in grades 2 to 12 are required to wear a mask when social distancing cannot be maintained. 3K to first are exempted from masks but allowed to wear them. And we will begin working with them when they come in on developing the habit of wearing them. Some special ed students will not be required to wear a mask, and there will be some medical exemptions with a note from a healthcare provider. You see a note there that Prisma has shared with us. They're encouraging clinical staff to allow exemptions only as necessary. Infection control, again, plans 1, 2, and 5. Cleaning and sanitize frequently touch surfaces, doorknobs, tabletops, chairs, staying home when sick. Isolating symptomatic staff and students. Isolation room close to health room with windows for supervision. Within health room, curtains around the cots, plastic barriers, and we'll establish a system to call the health room before sending students in each school, decrease risk of exposure, and decrease unnecessary traffic. Protocols for positive cases, exposures, and symptoms. There we'll follow the DHEC protocols, and you'll see the current ones listed in just a few minutes. There they are. I will not attempt to walk you through all of that. Again, you'll have a copy of this, and you can follow the line that indicates what we would do in the event of an exposure, either a student presenting symptoms, a student with a positive test, close contact with someone who's tested positive, students report exposure to someone who was exposed to a COVID-19 test. These are the latest guidelines from DHEC. We follow similar guidelines for employees. We have right now, I believe, the low 20s number of employees that are quarantined because they meet the criteria established by DHEC for being quarantined. Low 20s, primarily out of employees that are 12 months or work some in the summer. Protocols for attendance plans 1, 2, and 5 continued. Masks required on buses, except as noted. Buses will operate at 50% capacity. The state now permits 67, and we'll probably utilize a number between 50 and 67, but closer to 50. Again, load front to back and unload, load back to front and unload front to back with assigned seats. No field trips. Visitors and volunteers not have access to the interior of the school with very few exceptions. The number of visitors in the office area will be limited. Recess. Elementary students will continue to have recess outside whenever possible. And they can remove their mask as long as they're maintaining 6 feet of distance at recess. Sharing of classroom materials, students should have their own set of materials. Shared items, if they need to be used, will be sanitized between uses. Meals, you see there the plan for meals. Pick up the breakfast from serving lines, maintaining social distancing, eat in the classroom or cafeteria. They'll eat lunch in the cafeteria on plan 1, a classroom on plan 5, and depending on the school and the setup, potentially either in the classroom or the cafeteria on plan 2. Now remember, we'll have a much smaller number of students inside a cafeteria at any one time. What you might imagine there is a teacher ordinarily would have set aside maybe 25 or 28 seats in the cafeteria. They would still have that many, but on a 1 or a 2, they might have 5 students there, or they might have 11 students there. And we would distance them from the next group coming in. Eating in the classroom, only one option offered, and some items will be pre-wrapped and pre-packaged. That's because it's so labor intensive to do that. And obviously students may bring their own lunch. They cannot share that with others. Extracurricular activities, athletics, maintain protocols determined by the South Carolina High School League, implement any additional protocols that are determined with input from the Prisma Health athletic trainers and DHEC. Again, as a reminder, if we're in a 1, a 2, or a 5, those activities would continue under those guidelines. And again, we are developing and have developed specific guidance for band, marching band, orchestra, chorus, theater, visual arts, and dance. Classroom layouts. I think it's important if we're talking about asking you to look at approving a 1 or a 2 related to the spread, to not only see a number, but see what a layout might look like. So there it is in a Plan 1 kindergarten class size, they would have 7 students. In a Plan 2, they'd have 13. First grade, they'd have 5, Plan 2, 9. Second and third grade, 6, Plan 2, 12. Fourth and fifth grades, 7 on a Plan 1 and 14 on a Plan 2. Middle and high, 8 on a Plan 1 and 15 on a Plan 2. In every incidence, you can maintain social distancing. Those are the high-end numbers. Based on the sizes we will end up with, it is most likely that the number in each of those columns will be slightly less than what's shown there. And this is what it looks like. In attendance Plan 1, that's a kindergarten classroom. The broken line reflects the 6 feet. So you can see the teacher has 6 feet to maneuver there at the front of the room around the Promethean board. There's plenty of ingress and egress to the room, and it's easy to maintain the 6 feet between students. Again, management of those students in the kindergarten room, be 2 adults in there. All right, there's what it looks like in the first grade on a 1. Here's what it looks like in a second and third grade on a 1. Here's what it looks like in a fourth and a fifth grade on a 1. Again, your circles show your ability to maintain 6 feet. So if you look at those, that room looks a little close together. You got 3 feet from the center to the outside, 3 feet from the center to the outside, and then a little more than 3 feet between the 2 circles. So they actually have a distance of about 9 feet. All right, grade 6, 7, and 8, and high school. You see again the ability to maintain that, and that's would be the largest class they would have in a Plan 1. All right, the virtual program, dedicated teaching staff. Again, high school as described earlier. Full day schedule, it requires a year-long commitment. We will allow transfer after semester 1 as space is available. Obviously, we believe that's best for students and families with health concerns and for those who want or need certainty and predictability in the schedule. Here's our current numbers. We have 10,000, right at 10,300 elementary students, over 6,000 middle school students, and around 7,600 high school students, for a total of 24,000 students. We have currently 1,000 students on a waiting list who applied more than 24 hours after the deadline. We took not only all the ones who had applied by the deadline, but we also were able to accommodate those within 24 hours of the deadline. And you see there the number of teachers be assigned and hired, and we gave priority to those teachers who requested it based on health concerns, family concerns, or child care concerns. So everyone who expressed that need at the elementary or middle school level has been moved to teaching in the virtual program. All right, this is a reminder of our connectivity, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about losing students. By May 26th of 2020, there were only 54 students who we had failed to make contact with. 54 students, 0.14%. There were outreach efforts from the classroom, the school, and the district level. You see a reminder there of the level of transiency we have in an ordinary year. 11% moving within the district, 8% approximately leave the district, and about 8% move into the district. Internet access and connectivity this fall. CARES Act funding for free internet for eligible families through December 2020. We are providing mobile hotspots that we've obtained from the state, and we're looking at additional possible community access points. We still have 3,109 remaining Chromebooks not turned in. We continue to track down those devices. and we will address any of those who are still outstanding as time moves on. But they will not be issued a new device until they've returned the device they had or made some arrangement for its replacement. Arrangement doesn't have to be all at one time, but some plan for how they're going to replace the device. We have 4,827 Chromebooks to be repaired. Now, we have an issue there with we're only able to fix about 127 a day. And you'll see later on a request in this agenda to purchase some additional Chromebooks so that we have a buffer to ensure that we don't have anyone starting school without having access to a Chromebook. And you see their anticipated repair date of 8/24, which still leaves about 3,000 out there. We're gonna have to pause again. We've lost our signal.
Dr. Royster, there will be several questions once you complete your presentation.
Good,
Okay.
thank you. We hope to be back on the air here briefly. This is a problem we have not experienced before, and we're not sure exactly what the cause of the problem is. It should be just a few more minutes. We're back up, but we're not yet back live on the YouTube channel.
Burke,
Yes.
may I ask a question while we're waiting? It's Crystal. When you said earlier that if COVID is present in the schools, is that, is there a way you could help me understand if you mean a school or the school district, and whether the way you decide relates to, let's say, a higher incidence in one place?
Crystal, I don't think we can.
I think this is a question, Dr. Crystal Ball O'Connor, that everyone will need to hear.
That's fine. I just thought he said it, but I didn't understand it. So I'll wait and ask it again.
I did. We'll make sure we answer that toward the end. We are back live now and accessible through
the
YouTube channel. Again, one of our issues there is our ability to repair these devices quickly. We've added personnel to that repair effort. We've increased from, I believe at one time we were completing about 50 repairs a day. We're up to 127 a day. Hopefully we can continue to increase that. But again, we want to have a cushion there. We'll make sure that we have the devices that we need to have. So that's the reason for one of the recommendations of using some of the CARES Act funding. All right, we talked about this a little bit earlier, and that is applying to teach in the virtual program if that helps the family situation, and we've been able to accommodate all of those individuals, the elementary and middle school level, who requested that. We also have a partnership that is developing with some community organizations to provide childcare for school-age children. Not quite ready for a public announcement about that. I do want to express our appreciation to Mr. Lewis in his role as the director of First Steps, been very instrumental in leading and putting together a group of folks to carry that out. Hopefully there'll be an announcement perhaps later this week, more specifically regarding that. We also have been informed that the Children's Museum of the Upstate is going to be able to provide 100 school day slots and a larger number of after-school slots in some programs that they will be running there on a daily basis, and they will provide pre-registration priority for our employees. So two good, positive pieces of information there, I believe. All right, accommodating employees with child care and elder care responsibilities. All right, you see a summary of that. Eligible employees can utilize the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act during periods of hybrid and or 100% e-learning. That provides a maximum of 12 weeks leave, and the leave pay is 2/3 of an employee's regular pay up to a maximum of $25 per hour. They can also apply their personal or vacation leave to that to make up the difference, so to speak. Now, sick leave cannot be used if no one in the house is sick. Now, that reverts back to our policy regarding sick leave. So if someone in the house is sick and an ongoing medical condition would most likely qualify for that as well, they can combine this with their accrued sick leave. And remember, they also our teachers had the opportunity to be able to work remotely in the virtual program. All right, you'll see later in the agenda, I talked a little bit about it, but the CARES Act funds request, we need some additional software to facilitate student-teacher interaction during virtual learning in math, reading, science, and social studies, and to enable real-time participation and feedback during online learning. Now, this would be for students who are 100% virtual and for students who might be virtual at some point in their schedule. And we get to the question part, if you have specific questions about that $1.147 million, Mr. McCoy will address those. You also see there 4,000 Lenovo Chromebooks at $300 each. That's to restock our inventory of spare devices, about $1.2 million, to make sure we don't have students who have downtime because they do not have a device or access to a device. Then you'll see this pretty broad category: reusable cloth mask, disposable medical mask, hand sanitizer, touchless hand sanitizer stations, plastic cups for water filling stations. In other words, we're cutting off all the water fountains. So you have to fill your bottle or a cup with water from a water fill station. Non-latex gloves, face shields for nurses, face shields for teachers' aides in pre-K first, and isolation gowns for nurses. Also signage. I don't think that appears in there, but signage. And we replenish those things monthly as needed. This is simply an estimate, this $960,000, to get us started and likely carry us, if not the whole first semester, the first quarter. Some of this is just not possible to predict how quickly, for example, how quickly people are going to go through sanitizer. We estimated it based on pumping a certain amount one time per student per the number of students in school. But that's just an estimate. It's something to base it on.
One time.
But again, as you might imagine, some child will come up there and hit the thing one time, and others will, 25 times to get a whole lot of it. So it's very difficult to predict this. This is our best estimate of the initial cost for this and some ongoing cost. Again, we might have to come back to this at some point in the future, but it's a total of $3.3 million, asking you all to approve that expenditure from the CARES Act. There was we have a little over 17 million in there. We have already filed for reimbursement from general fund expenditures from last year. I believe the amount we filed for is a little over $8 million, but all that does is simply come back, reimburse us for expenses already made, and that would accrue to the general fund balance. This is asking to go directly to this and take it from the CARES Act funds instead of utilizing fund balance for those expenditures. Considerations and next steps. We would ask you to vote on our framework alignment today and our CARES Act funds allocation. We'll continue the communications efforts we have. One of the things we didn't really highlight it here, we've shared that with you. We've had a series of individuals in answering emails and phone calls and providing specific answers, specific questions, whether it's about special education or about the bus schedule, whatever it might be about. We've had that effort underway now for a little more than 2 weeks and had tremendous public response to that. And I think we've gotten a lot of information out there to help people answer their questions, and we will continue to provide that service. We anticipate a public announcement regarding the schedule for the start of school in early August. Teachers report, as a reminder, on August the 10th, leap days required by the state, invitation to students and their parents. They may attend if they choose to do so. August 17 to 21, and the first day of school for all students, August the 24th. So that brings us to the end of our formal presentation. And now we'd like to go back and pick up those questions that you all had, so we make sure that we provided all the information that everyone needs.
Thank you. Dr. Royster, Mrs. Grayson has a question in reference to DHEC.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to make sure I unmute. So right now, 2 categories were high and 1 category were low, the trending down. So my question is, what happens if those different categories are in conflict?
Well, the category where we're trending down is a reflection of the other 2 categories. So that third category, the one where we're decreasing, it simply is the measure of the movement of the other 2. So
Right.
Increasing, stable, or is it decreasing? And over the 3 weeks of different 2-week intervals, it has decreased. Both categories have decreased. We view that as a very positive trend.
So if schools were open tomorrow, what would we do?
If schools were opening tomorrow, I would say that based on that stability, if you all approve this framework, we would most likely begin in person with a 1.
Okay. And did I understand you correctly that if we are able to operate under attendance plan 1, athletes would be able to play and practice as they normally do?
Yes. In fact, as we have indicated, since we suspended the athletic conditioning, we review that weekly. So we will be reviewing that data that came in yesterday, today, to make an announcement regarding conditioning and practice, which might occur between now and the start of school.
Okay, so is it possible that, I know the data comes out from DHEC on Monday, is it possible that we could start as early as next week, or are we now?
Yes, that's possible.
We could start as early as August 10th.
Yes, ma'am, that's possible.
Okay.
We would plan to make that announcement later today.
Okay, and my other question is, it sounds like we're going to have some fluidity between schools. If there is an outbreak of this illness at one end of the county and one team becomes infected, like some of the professional sports teams have, is that going to be made on a school by school basis? In other words, would other teams in the county be able to play their games on schedule?
At this point, I would answer that question, and I think it also supplies the answer to Dr. O'Connor's question earlier. These things related to COVID positive test and spread within a school, I would envision that we would be making decisions and calls related to individual schools.
Okay.
We could have, to your point, a school or a team, we could have a spread within that school, within that athletic team, within the band. We could have it at a middle school within a team of teachers. So going back to the DHEC guidance, we would be making calls for closure that might relate to an individual or individuals or a class or a group of classes or a school or perhaps a group of schools or a team, because it can spread quickly and could have a negative effect in one area and have no effect in another area in the county.
Right. And if I understand you correctly, the reason we need a framework based on some level of scientific information is that these decisions will have to be made in between board meetings, which are currently the second and fourth Tuesday of each month. Is that right?
Right. We're asking you to provide us with a framework to make our decisions in. In ordinary emergency closing situations, inclement weather, water line break, electrical outage. Those are temporary situations. We make a call based on the circumstances that day, that time. Inclement weather, it might even be a series of days. But this circumstance could very well be months of time. We felt like it was important for the board to approve a framework for us to operate. Now, obviously, there's discretion within that framework. The discretion is to move one status to the other status inside the framework, and also to make calls making things more restrictive should there be an outbreak in an individual class, a school, or to your illustration, a team.
Okay. Well, I want our schools to open. I think everybody in this room, virtual room, wants schools to open. I want our athletes to be able to play. But I appreciate your efforts to outline a framework by which we can make daily decisions, because we got new information from the CDC yesterday. And I just don't see, I think it would be irresponsible of this board to try to say schools are open or schools are closed, because it's not black and white, and it's going to change, and parents are going to change their mind based on what is going to happen. We could half our numbers by the time school starts. We could double our numbers. And so I appreciate what you're trying to do. I might have more questions later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grayson. Well said. Dr. Royster, I've got Mrs. Michelle Goodwin-Caldwell. She has a couple of questions, one pertaining to protocol for high school reference, elementary, middle school schedules, but a few others. Ms. Caldwell.
Yes, Dr. Royster.
Yes,
I kept hearing you say elementary and middle school. The high schools are not following the same protocol as elementary and middle school. Why is that?
Okay, they would follow the same days of week in person, but we found it to work more efficiently and to be able to schedule better to allow the high schools, because remember, these are our largest schools, but to be able to schedule their students, whether they be virtual or in person, utilizing their current faculty. Not only does that benefit their students, it also provides some opportunities for students at smaller schools they might not have. Because if they're a virtual program student and they're at the smallest high school in the district and they want to take a course that's offered at the largest high school in the district that's not offered at their school, they can do so through virtual. Again, high school schedules are so much more complex and complicated than elementary and middle school schedules. You know, elementary, there's your teacher, there's your grade level, that's where you stay all day. Middle school, here's your team. You stay within that team. You might have a different math, you might have a different English. Predominantly, you're with that team all day long. You change when that team changes.
Okay,
high school, your first period class, when you go to your second period class, none of the people that were in your first period class may be in your second period, or maybe two of them are.
Okay, I've heard from a couple of high school teachers that said they wanted to do virtual, but that was taken off the table, and they didn't sign up for virtual because it said that they wouldn't be guaranteed a spot at the same school that they were at if they did that. Who do they need to contact
if they have
to get some of their questions answered?
If they will simply contact that number, the COVID line that we have set up, they can get them there, or they can contact the employee relations person in HR. They have a medical issue. We do have some high school teachers teaching 100% virtually from off-site. They have to have a documented medical issue because of the way we have structured that we believe is in the best interest of our students. And what was your second question, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell?
That just had to do with the high school, but I have a couple of other questions.
Okay.
Did you say that the DHEC data for the low, medium, and high was based on a 2-week average? Is that what I heard you say?
It is based on a 2-week look back, and they revise it every week. So late yesterday afternoon, they took off the 2-week-old data and they added a new week to it. So you still got 2 weeks, but it's the latest 2 weeks.
Okay, so the latest 2 weeks, if I remember right, looking at the data that you had up there, it had some days that were going back and forth from high to medium. How do they get the when I saw at the bottom it had that it was low? Is it low right now? Or is it medium?
It is low in their measure of decreasing. I'm trying to pull back up the chart. They measure across the incident rate per 100,000. Now, we have put the Greenville County numbers in there. Mm-hmm. They do an average, because I don't know that their reporting by day is necessarily pinpoint, so it is more accurate to use an average. It's more accurate over time. It's the number that was reported that day, but it could cross over days. So I think they use an average to be more, in an effort to be more accurate. All right, so the rate per 100,000 has gone from 500 to 431 to 333. Then they look at the percent of positive, i.e. the number of people tested and the percent of those tests that were positive. And one person counts one time. So if you went and had a test and you went back 3 days later and you had another one, and you went back 2 days later and you had another one, they count one positive. If you tested positive all 3 times, that's 1. If you tested positive once and negative twice, that's 1. So it's an unduplicated count, and it went from 18.9% to 17.8 to 15.4. So we're seeing fewer incidents and a less positive percentage test results. That drives the middle column, which is where they show the trend. So 3 weeks ago, the trend was high. Last week, it was medium, which translates to stable. And this week, when I say this week, the week ending last night, which I believe would have been a Sunday end, it showed a decreasing or low trend. So it is moving in the right direction, and it is moving sufficiently in the right direction to cause it to go from high to medium to low.
Okay, so the trend is only one of the 3, but we look at all 3 when determining.
The trend, the center one, is the look at all 3. It's the combining of the 3 to give you a direction.
Okay.
Now we do look at all of them. Yes, ma'am, you're correct about that. We look at all of them, but the one that really is most important to our decision making is that center one. Are we in an increasing environment? Things are getting worse? Are we a stable environment? Or are we a decreasing environment, which indicates things are getting better?
Okay. Another question. You said that some of the schools are programs would have an exception, like special ed, as far as the amount of students that will be attending school.
Yes,
Does that also apply to Sterling School that have small classes anyway?
The only difference at Sterling is some of those classes are having to be done both virtually and in person, but no, there is no difference in attendance there. It's slated along with the other elementary and middle schools. Where you would most likely see this, for example, would be Washington Center. It might be possible that we might operate Washington Center 4 or 5 days. Because when you think about Washington Center, the size of the classrooms there and the number of adults to assist with the students there and the severity of their handicapping conditions, we might very well have them present much more frequently than other students, because there is a greater ability there to deal with social distancing and other issues that might arise with those students, simply because of the nature of their handicapping conditions.
Okay, you just said that about Washington Center. What about like a jail man that has those type of classes also?
Special needs.
Like a Washington Center.
Well, any place where there might be the better example, and jail man is a good example of this. Better example, self-contained and those sorts of classes. Those students, depending on their team identified particular individual needs, might be in attendance more days than their fellow students that are not, that do not have similar handicapping conditions.
Okay, just one more question. Do y'all have the number or the percentage of teachers or administration that have decided to retire or not come back? Or do we have enough teachers, or do we have a shortage?
Well, we have a sufficient number of teachers at this point. I'm not aware that we have a higher than normal percentage retiring, but we might. We'll be glad to get that information and send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin-Caldwell. At this time, Mr. Sailors has a special ed question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Actually, Burke, I've got more than one topic here. First one's a simple part. The 3.3 million additional funding that you're recommending today for supplies, software, and Chromebooks, that is over and above the amount of money that we also set aside in our budget establishment this last year, correct?
Yes, sir. There's 1.5 million, which really set aside for cleaning and disinfecting. That's correct.
Now, I realize all of that comes from different resources or pots of money, if you will. So it's 3.3 million plus 1.5 to make sure that we're in a position to open schools safely, securely, and effectively. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
With the added caveat that we might come back and ask for a little bit more.
Well, I understand that. I just want the community to understand that we're taking this conversation very seriously, and there's some serious dollars associated with what we're doing.
Yes, sir.
The second thing, this one is related to special ed. I can't speak for my colleagues on the board, but the questions that I've been receiving from members of the community have been predominantly focused around extracurricular activities and special ed related questions. You've already answered the questions that Ms. Grayson had related to extracurricular, which was on my list. So let me focus a moment quickly on special education.
I interrupt. I understand that the audio and video has gone off again. Am I correct?
Chris, the audio and video off.
So audio and video, we cut so they wanted to do this.
The audio's on?
Yes.
The audio is on. There is no video right now other than your picture up there.
So what I'm getting is, people are texting me saying I can't see or hear anything. It's gone off. I don't know if that's the case or not. That's the only reason I was interrupting.
Yes, sir. From our side, we believe that we're still carrying the audio. There's just no picture to see. We took down the presentation.
Yeah. Okay. So okay, that's fine. So but the audio I'm hearing the audio is not coming through. That's the only reason. Is that the case, or are people outside able to hear the audio?
Yes, sir. Our technology people determine the audio is going through.
Okay.
There is no video at this time.
Okay. Yep.
Are we ready?
Continue, Mr. Sailors.
Thank you. As part of the questions that have come together related to special ed, there are some concerns in the community about are the IEPs being handled properly because of distance education? Have we had to change our plans on how we address and deliver special ed services? Has the State Department provided input and approval to any changes that we've made? And in simple terms, are we just following the law that we should be following? So those are the questions I have. I'd like to ask you and Mrs. Hogan to answer that if at all possible, just so we can get on the record where we're at.
Yes, sir. I'll answer the last question. The answer to that one's yes, then I'm gonna let her fill in the details. So, Ms. Hogan?
Yes, good morning. Mr. Sailors, we are absolutely following the law. I will say it's no secret that when we went home in March, IEPs are written for a year, and they are typically written for students to be in the school building 5 days a week. So when a team is meeting and planning for everything, they are talking about a kid being in the building 5 days a week. So when we went home, we did everything in our power from March until June to implement every part of the IEP that we could to the maximum extent possible. We also sent notification to families to say that we are doing our due diligence and everything that we can do. Certainly we could not implement every single aspect because we were not in person. We did not alter those IEPs at that time to reflect being out of school because we had hoped that we would be returning to school. But what we did was teachers, if you recall, were required to make sure that they had contact with their students at the same frequency that they did when they were in the building. So if they saw a student every day of the week with a disability, they were supposed to be maintaining contact every day of the week. And planning for the fall, what we have done is created, there was a slide I believe Dr. Royster went over about the instructional contingency plan. And really that is what we have done as far as our best way to remedy the fact that IDEA wasn't really created in 1975 for this type of situation. When I say created, it wasn't really intended to capture what we would do in this type of situation. So to make reasonable efforts to be able to make sure that we communicate with our families, we created a process here. You will see it's the same type of process that is happening across the country. I do believe ours is excellent. I'm pretty proud of it. We have shared it with everyone across the state. We have shared it with the State Department, and I understand they shared it last week with some others. It's a form essentially that allows us to communicate to parents specifically about any of the 3 scenarios that might happen. And it's about COVID, but it would also extend for further situations. If you were a county on the coast and you had to close because of hurricanes, it would address any emergency situations. But we will be holding meetings with families. Our goal would be to have those done by September 30th for all students with disabilities. We will begin training teachers next week on that new form and the new process. It's called an instructional contingency plan, and it really speaks to times when students are enrolled in school 5 days a week, but we are not able to have them in the building 5 days a week. And it allows the parents to provide us input about which goals and which pieces and portions of the IEP they believe are the most important to be addressed when the student is in the building, and how they would like that to be addressed when they're not in the building. It has a section that asks for any kind of parent training. It lets them speak to what they would need support with in that area. It's fairly comprehensive. We're currently having it translated into Spanish so that we have that ability to get that out next week. And so I think that we have done everything that we could possibly do. And certainly we'll be holding IEP meetings and instructional contingency plan meetings as soon as teachers are back to update IEPs for those who have gone virtual. The virtual students who have gone to the virtual academy will have full IEP reviews again so that they can address the new learning environment.
Thank you very much. That's it, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Sailors. At this point, Dr. Cristobal O'Connor has several questions. Dr. Royster. Dr. Cristobal Connor, you are on mute, so no one can hear you talk. There.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you for answering the question earlier, Dr. Royster, that one of the slides you had indicates if there are numbers of cases in a school that you will respond individually rather than having to make a decision district-wide. That was helpful to know. One question to follow up is about teachers for virtual. It is always best to try to match up the desire for that opportunity for the reasons you gave, rather than assigning teachers to that role. And I wonder if there is any reassurance that can be given to those teachers who are willing to volunteer to go to teach virtually this year, that they will be given every consideration to return to their home school so that they won't be discouraged from signing up and then just going into an automatic assignment that may or may not be as good a fit in terms of teacher preparation for that role or desire for it.
To the best of our ability to do so, our intent is to return a teacher to the school from which they came. Voluntarily came, or the ones we've had to transfer. We've had to transfer some. We didn't have a sufficient number to volunteer to cover every need that we had. However, for us to absolutely commit, we would send them back. We can't do that because we'd be committing to something that we might not be able to follow through on. We don't know how many students and parents may choose to continue to take advantage of a virtual education for their child once we've returned to a more normal set of circumstances health-wise. So we may still have to operate a virtual school. And at any rate, I don't see it all of a sudden going away completely and turning right back to traditional. I would see it declining over time. So we would do our best to return them to the school from which they came. Even if everybody left virtual school at the end of this year and returned to regular school, that particular school that they came from might have fewer or more teachers depending on the population of the school. So those are the reasons we can't say to someone who goes, whether voluntarily or is transferred, that we will absolutely send you back to the school you came from. What we will say to them is we do everything possible to return you to the school from which you came.
So it's kind of a first to be rehired plan.
We wouldn't hire somebody in their place. We would give them the opportunity to go back there before we would hire someone new to the district or transfer somebody that's in another school.
Okay, thank you. And I think if that is made clear, maybe others would volunteer, because I noticed from your list, you're still way short of teachers for the numbers that we have indicating an interest. Is there any emphasis at all in your thinking about outdoor learning and the ways that that can help us with allowing more students to attend or be outside, whether it's tents or playgrounds or other outdoor spaces that would allow the proper or foster social distancing and fit in with the plan that you are trying to make for the safe return?
I mean, that's something we would certainly encourage principals and teachers to do within their ability to do so on their campus. It's probably not something that we can make as part of a plan because it's so weather dependent. Weather this time of the year could be the fact it's 100 degrees or that you got frequent thunderstorms. So as a part of a regular routine plan, probably not. But we certainly would encourage them to go outside because number one, there's all kind of evidence that being outside is not, number one, it's just better for you generally if they're not inclement circumstances as to the weather, but it also reduces the ability or the rate of transmission. So it would certainly be something that we would encourage principals and teachers to consider. However, they also have to consider, can they maintain that social distancing, transitioning to the outside,
right,
back inside, and not mixing unlike groups, i.e. not
Yes.
having two teachers' classes together.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of good, helpful literature out there now from Denmark and other countries that have routinely had outdoor learning as part of their curriculum. And maybe some of the curricular leaders at the district could provide ideas to the schools about ways they could use their outdoor spaces to improve during this health crisis. Another is, I appreciate the detail that you've considered on all of this. And when you look at the age variation and those under 10 in this plan that would allow for younger students to possibly return at a different number. For example, let's say at a 2, where the older students might only be returning at a 1.
Yeah, I would, it would be my view, again, you all approve this framework, that within that framework, we might have different students at different levels in different days of attendance. And younger children could possibly come more days of attendance than older children.
Well, I would very much be eager to see your thinking and work on that, and I'm glad to hear that that is a possibility. Regarding no penalty if students are ill and don't come to school, I think that's a very important communication for people. I think you said it. I'm not sure if it was on the slide, but people are so used to the idea of if you miss so many days of school, you're going to have a problem, that I think strong communications to the contrary, letting them know that, in fact, if you do come to school and you've got signs of illness, you'll be sent home. And we will support you if you're ill. Those communications will be helpful to families, I think.
We want to change that message to be, if you don't do your work, that's a problem, not your physical presence. More interested in you getting the work done with our help and support. If you don't feel good, think your child's running a temperature, if your child gives indications they don't feel good, we want you to keep your child at home.
Okay.
Their benefit and for the other students and for the employees' benefit.
Absolutely. And I like the protocols you've talked about with health rooms to try to keep those who may be symptomatic apart and exiting the building without going back through the larger group. I have the question about water fountains. Will they all water fountains will be closed and replaced with some opportunity for students to get water with paper cups, but are they touching, or is it a touchless system?
They're touchless fill stations.
Right.
You could use the actual tap, but they'll have touchless fill stations in the school.
Okay, great.
A number of them in each location. And we would encourage them to bring their own water bottle, but if they don't, that's the reason for buying the disposable cups.
I guess all of that will be communicated as well when they return, to bring your water bottle. You can fill it at a touchless station. Yes. Also, with hand washing in the restrooms, will there be touchless options for getting the soap and washing the hands, or not?
We have some places where there are touchless options for turning the water on and off, and other places where it's the old shut off, in which case students would have to be instructed, if you use that, you should use the paper towel to turn it on.
So I guess I see that as a place for extra care and attention needed by the adults present. Or if you came back with a budget recommendation to allow for touchless hand washing, if soap and water is preferred to just the hand sanitizer in the classroom, then we don't want to have them immediately touching what everyone else has touched right after they've washed their hands. So thank you.
I think to change that out would be cost and time prohibitive. So where it can't be monitored appropriately, they really need to depend on the sanitizer.
Okay. I will let others speak now. And I thank you for this work. And I'm grateful for the fact that we are not in the position of deciding what is medically appropriate, that we have medical guidance and that you are following a procedure very closely to make sure that this is based on the best medical evidence up to the hour every day that you are following it. And I'm very encouraged for the change in direction. And I believe that it is because our community has responded to say, if we want our children back in school, we need to do our part. And I have noticed a lot more mask wearing and awareness.
Thank you, Dr. Cristobal O'Connor. Is that it? Did I lose Dr. Cristobal O'Connor? At this time, I'll call on Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Ms. Liz Wells. Dr. Royster, just a huge thank you to you and your team. I think that you guys have really done an incredible job putting together some really dense documents on an incredible amount of information that's just so thorough, and I just really appreciate that. And I especially thank the communications team for the Facebook Live videos, which I think really broke down a lot of questions in ways that families could really understand them. So thank you first for that.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
I just have a few questions. So one is about masks. And I think in your presentation here, we're talking about masks being required for second grade and up.
Yes, I think I said third earlier, but it's second grade and up. You're correct.
Superintendent Spearman, I think, issued guidance that masks should be required by all students. Could you just kind of speak to maybe has our position changed? Are we in compliance with her with our plan?
No, sir. Our position has not changed, and the State Department confirmed to us in writing late Friday afternoon that our plan, as approved, was acceptable to them in accord with their guidance. So there is not a need for us to change. Now, our plan is, obviously, if we can train students of that age to wear their mask over time, we would want to do that. And they will have to wear it on the bus, really to protect other students and the driver, but it does not alter the written plan that you've seen. That's correct.
Okay. And then I know we're going to talk about the CARES Act funding as a separate action, but just to clarify, within it, it talks about providing masks for students. So is it your understanding that the district is going to provide masks for students second grade and up? We
will provide those for students who have an economic hardship with providing them themselves. And obviously, if a student doesn't remember and they show up at the bus and there's not a mask, they will be handed a mask or issued a mask by the bus driver. And we will have spares at the school. So we're not buying them with the idea in mind that we're going to provide, 50-something thousand every day, but we believe we have a sufficient number on hand to accommodate those who might forget or those who need some help with procuring the mask.
Okay. In the presentation and in the packet, I think one of the phrases that's used is parents are asked to screen their children's temperature before sending them to school. I know that's different than the guidance that most childcare providers are using of actually like literally standing at the door and screening them. Can you just maybe speak to the difference?
Yeah, the latest guidance that we received from DHEC and the advice we've gotten from medical providers have been that that's not necessarily that effective with younger children, and they did not recommend that we do that.
Okay.
Now, if that advice were to change, obviously we would shift and accommodate that change.
Okay. You guys have provided us the number of students who have opted to go to virtual. I know that deadline has officially passed. Is it still possible for families to move over to virtual, or was that a hard date that passed?
Well, we took the hard date. We were able to accommodate everybody that came in 24 hours after the hard date, but we now have 1,000 on a waiting list.
Okay.
We will be able, we think, to accommodate some number of them. But obviously,
Okay.
we have to move teachers from the real bricks and mortar, I guess in the social media shorthand, from the IRL school over to the virtual school. And we need to get students' class and teacher class roles set so that they can begin to know who their teacher is and the teacher can begin to know them. So we will be able to accommodate some of those. I would hesitate to commit that we could accommodate all 1,000 and some odd right now.
So families can still apply to virtual. They just aren't going to be waitlisted until you can determine whether you can accommodate them or not.
We'll go by the wait list. We'll go by their rank on the wait list by level. They'd be in an order for elementary, an order for middle, and an order for high school.
One of the questions I was asked about students eating in their classroom is that, we have a large number of elementary school students in particular who have allergies. Is there going to be any more restrictions placed on the types of foods that kids can have in their classrooms? Will it be on a class by class basis? Just thinking about things like peanuts.
They would have to follow the same restrictions that we normally follow. One thing I think sometimes people want us to assure that we have a peanut-free environment, which you can't do. Because you never know when a child will stick a pack of peanut butter crackers in their pocket. So we will follow the same protocols that we would follow if we were in a regular lunchroom setting. And certainly we control what's handed out. I would think that the social distancing would help that as well if they're eating in the classroom.
You gave some really thorough examples of sick leave and when employees would qualify for different types of leave. There was one that I thought was in the earlier packet that I don't remember seeing on this slide, so I just want to ask it just to make sure I didn't misread something somewhere. If an employee believes they've been exposed to COVID and they quarantine for the period of time that you would need to because you've been exposed, but they don't test positive for COVID, do they still qualify for the EFMLA, or would they need to use their sick leave for a self-quarantine that doesn't have a positive test?
They would qualify for their sick leave. I'll have to get the answer to your other question.
Okay.
I don't know if Ms. Gibbs is on here right now. She could answer it if she's on here right now.
It's okay.
They do qualify for the 80 hours if they're quarantined.
Did you hear her response, Mr. Lewis?
If they are directed by a physician or by us, by the school district.
Okay, so if they are exposed and they are directed by a physician or the school district to quarantine, even if they don't test positive, they would still qualify.
Correct.
Okay.
And they're depending on their job category. It is possible that they could work remotely from their home while they're in quarantine. We had some people that did that before we let school out in March. So that there is some limited possibility there as well.
Okay. And you provided the numbers of students who's opted for virtual. Could you provide us, in not this moment, but at some point, the number of students that you think have also opted to disenroll and move to private school or to homeschool?
Yes, sir. When we get those numbers settled, and normally those numbers don't settle till after school starts. So
yes, sir. That's fine.
Probably be sometime after school starts.
Okay. The last question I just have is, the governor has provided a large number of messages and guidance to help communities open and close businesses. One of them was that he directed any public space like theaters that they could reopen as long as their capacity was fewer than 250 people, which apparently is the magic number for the number of people in a tight space. Do any of our schools have a capacity of fewer than 250 people?
Mr. Lewis, Dr. Royster stepped out for a moment.
You're muted, Scott. Sorry.
Was your question, do any of our schools have a space smaller than 250?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if we were applying the same standards that we would apply to the Peace Center, to all of our schools. I think I remember that every single one of our schools has a student enrollment and staff enrollment of higher than 250 people.
Correct.
Meaning that every one of our facilities would have more children and students in it than the governor has said is unsafe to be in a public space.
I think what he's saying is in one location within that space. So are you saying not to have more than 250 people within a building, or are you saying not to have more than 250 within an auditorium?
I just wanted to clarify that we have designated 250 as the magic number that we can't exceed at the Peace Center or at a public theater. But we also are directing schools to reopen that all accommodate more than that number. And so even though we've given an exemption to them, we're putting more people in those buildings if they're full, if we follow the governor's recommendations, than he would allow to be in other public spaces if they followed their recommendations. It just seems inconsistent to me on the governor's part. You don't have to answer.
Yeah, I understand the point you're making, but I think as we bring children back into school, that what our plan is for them to be allowed to be socially distanced, which those other venues may allow.
That's fine, but if I look at a school like Malden, you're going to have 250 people walking through that front door at the same time. So it just seems unrealistic that the governor would expect buildings to open to the public and serve fewer than 250 people, but then also direct schools to open to the public that are going to serve more than 250 people.
And I think you've hit on there, Ms. Lewis. I apologize for having to step out for just a minute. But I think you've hit on there one of the great challenges for our principals. Now, I feel very confident that they'll rise to that challenge. So they've got to figure out with their staff, how do you safely get students into and out of the building and minimize their contact with one another? We had a great, particularly now this is going to be a challenge because they've not had to do it at middle and elementary level, but the high schools had a great opportunity for a dry run of that with their graduations and keeping people apart. The challenge is going to be, I believe, with our younger students. But again, I'm confident our principals are going to come up with plans to stagger their arrival, to appropriately handle them coming in, to minimize that contact. And we also, it depends on which school it is, I believe our district average in virtual is around 30%, maybe a little bit more than 30%. We have some schools where it's 40%. So we're talking about a significantly reduced overall number coming into the buildings at all levels.
Thank y'all. I had no further questions. Ms. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I appreciate those were great questions. At this time, I will, Ms. Lisa Wells has several questions. Dr. Royster.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Leventis Wells. So does a special ed question, just to follow up to what Ms. Hogan was talking about with revisiting the IEPs and creating new plans. So one issue we had with regular ed and special ed in the March to June timeframe when we had to go out is that we didn't really have a good way to, level of accountability, if you will, to ensure that teachers were in contact with their students, that the services were being delivered in terms of either the special ed services or regular ed, for that matter. I heard a lot of feedback from parents about inconsistency in the communications. So last meeting, I asked that question about the regular ed. Do we have protocols in place so that teachers have a clear understanding, expectation, and then do we have a way to be sure that they're accountable to that? On regular ed side, the answer was yes. So now I'm going to ask the same question about the special ed services. Are we going to have, how can we be sure we have a level of accountability to make sure those plans that are developed are going to be followed and that student is getting that interaction?
I'm going to defer to Ms. Hogan to let her provide you with the particulars, but the short answer is yes, as it was to regular ed. This is a whole different undertaking than what, as you all know, what we had to patch together basically with 24 hours notice last spring. Ms. Hogan?
Yes, sir. You're absolutely correct. We do have, and I don't know what Jeff mentioned last time on the general ed side, but he probably spoke about the learning expectations that his academic specialist created. And we have the exact same thing that special education specialists created, specific learning expectations and specific expectations for how many minutes by age level, how many different, kind of assignment, if you will, or how the day would be structured by different types of students and different types of disability categories. It's very detailed and very structured. I think with putting that in writing, the teachers know exactly what's expected, but more importantly, that contingency plan that I spoke about, I think parents will know exactly what to expect at any of the 3 scenarios that are on that plan. I do think some of everything that you said, I believe is true about the spring. We had some missteps, certainly, because we were patching things together, like Dr. Royster said. But also, I think sometimes the perception of what the parent was looking for and then what we were doing didn't exactly match. And this contingency plan will give us an opportunity to talk specifically about what the parents and the students can expect from the school, but also to ask questions. Does that answer it, Ms. Wells?
Yeah, that's good. And I guess in both cases, I would expect that we would have a very clear feedback loop so that parents can kind of say to a teacher or to a principal that, hey, I'm not getting, this is what I thought I was supposed to be getting, or, hey, this teacher hasn't provided this direct instruction as I expected. We're going to have those same things in place, just like we did if people were walking into a school building.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that is difficult is that we do a lot of these meetings virtually, and not all of our families, are as adept at that. So we certainly want to make sure that we're following up with phone calls, but we still have the special ed specialists that work with the schools and the principals. I would just strongly encourage anytime a family has a question or concern that they do reach back out to the school, because as you mentioned, we heard some things after the fact that if we knew about them at the time, we certainly could have helped or could have remedied. But, the principals certainly, they know those expectations and they will continue. There's a chair of special education at the schools. There's typically an administrator assigned to support the PLCs with special education. With everyone having Google Classrooms, there's another way to monitor information there. But, that to me, the expectations are much clearer now.
Okay. And then I would say that in that regard, it seems like it'd be possible to do some audits, if you will, a month in, and just kind of random audits to check in. So similarly to what Dr. Royster, you mentioned about, there's the career center scenario where if you have a small number of students coming in, the amount of time they might be able to spend in that setting would be adjusted because you can socially distance. So would we similarly maybe be able to provide some of that resource support to students with IEPs in the school environment on a schedule that might be different than a 1 or 2 plan?
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to circle back to Ms. Caldwell-Goodwin's question earlier, if I could. They're kind of the same. It's really about, I think both of you are asking, if a student with a disability has needs, could they come at different times, what the plan is. And basically, all of the IEPs would be written on data that we use to determine how often they get services, okay? And so we believe that students need to be in school 5 days a week. So we would not want the IEP team making that decision, because every IEP team, our data is all based on previously on 5 days a week. So what we did do is look at, I do think there's a misconception sometimes that special education classes are often smaller. And that doesn't always, that's not always true. We have our caps are at 15 and 15 and 16, and many of our classes run at full capacity, and some of them are in smaller classrooms. So what we did to prepare for our recommendation with that was a facility study, if you will, of all the classrooms. And what we said was, on the front side, we want students who have more intensive services to be able to come as many days as possible, but we also need it to be equitable in the district. So after analyzing that, that's when we made the recommendation that students in that self-contained programming at the elementary and middle could come 2 days a week if we were on the 1 plan. at high school, we did not make that recommendation because the students, we found several of our classrooms that we could not do that in, but also the students who typically need to be in the self-contained classroom are often the students who may struggle the most with the social distancing. They may be the ones that struggle the most with wearing the masks and being able to follow those safety protocols. So we felt that that was not going to work as well. Plus, at the high school, the majority of the curriculum for our students with disabilities, we do online programming and some computer-based programs. So it was much easier to deliver their information to them at that one day and keep them the same as their peers in the building.
Okay, thank you. So I think I also heard you say, Dr. Royster, and it's really encouraging that given where we are with what's going on with our rates, our incident rates and positive tests, that we could likely be working out conditioning, resuming some extracurriculars next week. I know that puts you on the spot a little bit, but as soon as next week, we might get started back.
Yes.
Approve this framework.
Yes.
So with regard to framework and the motion, I want to make sure that I'm clear and that we all are, as a board, are clear about what it is that you have asked us to do. So maybe I'll talk about that, and then I'd like to go ahead and put the motion on the floor, the first motion, if I could. Ms. Leventis-Wells, would that be a problem?
No, that would be appropriate. Thank you.
So I'd like to move to approve the framework correlating DHEC community spread level ratings to GCS attendance plans as presented.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. And we still have questions. So thank you. Are you finished, Ms. Wells?
No, I want to follow up. I just thought it'd be appropriate to go ahead and put the motion on the floor.
Thank you. So the motion was made by Ms. Wells, and it was seconded by, I couldn't decide if it was Mr. Sailors or Ms. Glenda Morrison Fair.
I think it was me, Crystal.
Oh, Dr. Crystal Ball O'Connor. Good. Thank you. All right.
So I think in a lot of conversations, I know we've all spent hours and hours and days talking to folks about the role of the board in this plan and the role of the superintendent, the complexity of it, how we're making decisions. And I have said over and over, and I'm going to restate it for those I haven't talked to that might be listening in the community, I am neither a research scientist nor a medical professional. And so in my role as a board trustee, I'm looking for my administration to follow the appropriate guidance from the appropriate agencies, and those being, Dr. Royster, I think you put most all of them up there that you've mentioned to us before: CDC, South Carolina DHEC, you looked at American Academy of Pediatrics information, you're working closely with the local medical community. So in that regard, I'm appreciative of the fact that we're going to rely on the health agencies to provide us with health data that helps us to figure out how do we deliver instructional services. So with this motion that we have, we aren't specifically approving this plan that's in that document that's, I don't remember how many pages thick. What we're doing is saying that that plan that you have, a plan that you have, a 0, 1, 2, 5-day plan, is going to be aligned to DHEC ratings, which will help guide you in which plan you implement.
Yes, ma'am. That's correct. That's what we're asking you to do.
Oh, I was raised 20 years
One of the reasons, and several people have alluded to it this morning, our plan itself is probably 80 some odd pages, and it changes. For example, we may get different direction from DHEC. They might issue different guidance tomorrow than what they have issued today, and we would follow the guidance that they issue tomorrow. So we want that plan to be able to be flexible enough to respond immediately to the latest advice, input, direction, and recommendation of DHEC, CDC, Bon Secours, Prisma, the sources that we've used. And by doing it this way, it gives us the greatest flexibility to provide the most recent information to guide how we move within the framework that we're asking you to approve.
And I appreciate that because I think we've seen just since our board last met in June, the change in, to your point, the recommendations that are being brought out, the guidance, there's constant research. And so these things are going to be fluid. And so I'm glad that you're going to have that flexibility to make those changes. So with regard to that, the Department of Education approved your plan, our plan for reopening schools. How is that flexibility going to work with regard to their interaction with us?
The only caveat they put on their approval is that they wanted to see some in-person instruction before September the 14th. I don't think that if this framework, if approved as recommended and submitted, I don't see that conflicting with their approval. Because they also noted that should conditions change, they would be receptive to reviewing that caveat.
Okay. And similarly, let's say we get to October and guidance changes again, and we decide to make adjustments to get kids in school more in different ways, whatever that looks like. Are you going to have to submit your revised plans back to Department of Ed? So I'm just thinking about that adaptive piece of, we've given you the flexibility to make those changes without having to go through a formal review process. What does that look like with Department of Ed?
I don't believe there was anything in the plan or its approval other than the one condition that I mentioned to you. I don't believe there was anything in that approval that would cause us to have to go back to seek additional approval, because it relates very much to the spread and as defined by DHEC and their recommendations. Now, as they go through time, perhaps they redefine what the spread numbers look like.
Right.
But that would we'd still operate within their framework.
Okay. Well, I'm appreciative of this work. I have a few more questions just about the logistics, but again, I don't believe that's something that's necessary to deal with today. So I'll turn that back over to you, Ms. Leventis Wells.
Thank you, Ms. Wells.
As well as any question you have like that, or any other board member, if you want to send it to us and us send all the board that information, we'd be glad to do that as well.
That'd be great.
Some of you probably have some time constraints today.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Wells. That was well put. Ms. Glenda Morrison-Fair has a few questions on special ed as well as a couple of others. Ms. Glenda Morrison-Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mrs. Wells, I appreciate your questions because you hit on several questions that I had concerning the special education services. And I also would like to say to Tracy that a lot of people have contacted me and they appreciated the YouTube video, I believe, that you did, because it allowed them to realize they had an opportunity to contact your services so that they could ask additional questions. One thing that I have not heard, though, is that, and I want to be clear, that parents will be contacted so that they could have meetings, so they will be able to have meetings to understand what their student will be getting inside special education services. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's absolutely correct. Our goal would be to do as many as possible before the first day of school.
Okay.
I'm just not sure we can get 11,800 of them done before the first day of school. So we're really asking that we think a realistic time frame is by the end of September. And certainly if a parent has a concern before we call them, that they should let us know and we can get it set up. But absolutely. And their first contact would be with their school.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so very much. I had many questions about that. One other question, my last question, other questions of mine have been answered, but I had someone text me about Dr. Royster, the ventilation. How can we guarantee adequate ventilation?
Well, unlike some facilities and unlike some schools in our state, we have outstanding HVAC systems. You all know that because this district invested over $1 billion in constructing and renovating schools in the mid 2000s to into 2010 and 11. The very short answer is we have fresh air exchange in every building in this district. So we, unlike some places, we have the ability to constantly exchange fresh air with the air inside the room. That is on average about 3 times an hour. We have regular preventive maintenance for our HVAC systems where we regularly replace filters and ensure that every aspect of the system is working as it should be working. But the biggest thing is that constant exchange of fresh air and the fact that we are literally turning over all the air inside our facilities about 3 times an hour. It's really between 2 and 3. Mr. Carlin may want to add some to that. Mr. Carlin?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. And hopefully you can see me again.
Yeah.
Yes, we have made a concerted effort in our extended downtime to make sure our mechanical equipment is running at optimum, that the proper preventive maintenance has been performed on it, as well as making sure our filter media is appropriately changed out. And we will be focusing heavy attention on all of those as we begin the new school year. We've extended our run times for our mechanical equipment. As Dr. Royster was saying, we are going to be running the equipment, starting it earlier in the day, and we're going to be ending it at the end of the day to make sure we flush our buildings properly to respond to the current situation with the virus.
Thank you.
Yes,
Is that all, Ms. Marson Fair?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. While we have Mr. Carlin on, before I go to Mr. Meek, I just want to commend you. I have received a number of texts and emails referencing that one of your men, Mr. Bain, was on one of the talk shows this morning that showed I'm not sure if this is correct, Victory Backpack Sprayer, and how Greenville County School District has taken precautions in disinfecting all of the schools. And as Dr. Royster spoke to this, the disinfect and so forth that our students will be using, I'd like to commend Greenville County for thinking ahead and for making sure that Bon Secours Arena, when we had the graduations, was taken care of and everyone was safe environmentally, and that there were no coronaviruses that were detected during the graduations. That speaks volumes of what we're doing, and I'd like to commend you and your staff for that. Mr. Carlin.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Royster has mentioned this before, but the equipment that many of our viewers saw in the newscast with Mr. Stewart, that equipment we were utilizing at Bon Secours to get ready for those graduations. So a lot of lessons learned, and that really was the proving ground for what we're going to be using in the schools when we begin the school year.
Well, I thank you for your vision and I thank you for your leadership. And at this point, I have 3 board members that have questions, and I'm going to go with Mr. Meek.
Thank you, Ms. Wells. Ms. Flintus Wells. Most of my questions, Ms. Wells already got to and got answered. Thank you, Lisa. But Dr. Royster, could you go over one more time the condition that the State Department of Ed put on our district's plan and how that's going to be handled by the district?
They placed a condition, Mr. Meek, on our plan that we would have some level of in-person instruction before September the 14th. Right now, we have the LEAP week, which is required that we offer, that students may attend if they wish to and their parents wish to have them come. That's the week before school starts. So the LEAP week is the 17th. That's kindergarten through 8th grade. Doesn't include high school. Then the first week of school, at minimum, we would have students in to get their devices. And what that might look like will depend on how we start school. At this point, if the framework that we've recommended to the board is approved, and if the numbers continue in a positive way, I would envision that we will meet that requirement before September the 14th. So I don't see that as a barrier. They had also indicated in our conversation with them, should the metrics change significantly, they would revisit that condition. Did that answer your question for me?
Yes and no. I mean, I would love to have a definite, and I know that's impossible to get right now. The other question I have is on busing. Are we going to have enough drivers to accommodate the students ready to go whenever we go?
Mr. James, I know you're on here. I'm gonna let you speak to that. I'm sure we are still seeking some drivers and would happily take ones that we could get at this point. But you'd speak more specifically to our numbers.
Well, we are still short of drivers. We've made some headway. We've probably trained close to 30, reducing our need for drivers if everyone shows up to about 30. Once everybody's all said and done, the class that is currently going on this week will not be ready for the start of school. So the class that we had 2 weeks ago is the last class that will be able to get the first week, even with the pushback date of August 24th. Now, obviously, with 23,000 virtual students, we are seeing less bus riders. We've dissolved about 10 routes across the district to cut down on our driver shortage. I think we're going to be in decent shape to start the school year. Obviously, starting back on a 1 or a 2 is going to help us exponentially. But, you know, I can expand any more if you need any more clarification. But we are, the bottom line is we are still seeking drivers and we still continue to recruit drivers. That's an ongoing thing, even without a pandemic.
Okay. And we're still going to implement the early start time?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Meek. I appreciate it. And Ms. Bush had texted me a while back. So let me go with Ms. Bush. And then I have Mr. Shamley and I have Ms. Grayson. Okay. Ms. Bush.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. A lot of my questions have been answered, and thank you for this. It's information overload, and I don't envy the job you have. Y'all have all done a superb job in being able to filter through all this information and bring it to us this morning. The latest updates you have, and it is so exciting. I can say that I never had a doubt that our community would step up. If for anything, even if not for Clemson Carolina football, but for our children to be able to get back in school and for us to get back to some normalcy. And this has, the numbers don't lie. They have, they might be delayed by a couple of weeks, but we see what an impact our community has had and how they've behaved and how it has brought us to the point that maybe we will start down that road to normalcy again. So it sounds like through the special ed questions that were asked and the extracurricular, the students being able to get back to get on the practice fields, and those type of questions have already been answered. And then also, I was glad to hear that you said, and I want to make sure that within this framework that we'll approve, that younger students, the 10 and under in our elementary age, it is possible that they could be attending school more days than our middle and high schools that might be more in danger of spreading. So was I correct in hearing you make that statement, Dr. Royster?
Yes, ma'am. In fact, I think a good example of that might be if you look at what we propose in that framework for a medium spread, that we'd be on a 1 or a 2. I could see high schools being at a 1 on that and elementary schools being at a 2.
Right.
So yes.
Great. And I was also glad, one of my questions was about the entering and exiting of the building. And so I'm glad that our principals and our building leadership is going to be looking at those type of things to keep our students safe as they enter and exit, because that's some of the questions that I also had from parents. Also, I've talked to a lot of parents that have had that concern about, do I have to have a doctor's excuse, and the expense when everybody's struggling right now, the expense of if my child's running a temperature, do I have to go and get a COVID test, and do I have to have a doctor's excuse? So being able to address those kind of issues.
So now there should be in our community a fairly widespread accessibility for COVID tests that require neither a doctor's referral nor involve a fee.
Okay.
And in fact, we have partnered with emergency preparedness and some of the medical providers to hold some of those. Obviously, we're not holding them, but for them to hold them on our school campuses.
Right. And so back related to that testing issue, if we have, and you noted before, the difference between substantial controlled transmission or uncontrolled transmission. So would we have some type of framework or something in place if there is an outbreak at a school? I know that during regular flu seasons and times when we have like whooping cough and things like that, when we have outbreaks, we address schools separately. When we had stomach flus, things like that, will there be, the possibility, or will we be able to communicate with our parents that where you can be able to go and get testing? And even for our employees, will we have the type of testing that they can get tested and know whether, if they're positive or negative, that teacher would not be required to be out of the classroom for 10 to 14 days, but would be able through that test to see that they're negative and be able to return to the classroom sooner than what some people I'm hearing it might be a 3 to 4 day wait before they're getting tests back.
And unfortunately, that continues to be the case. Hopefully that will also continue to improve. At one point, it's probably closer to 7 days. And now I think it's, as you noted, around 3 to 4. Hopefully that will continue to improve and that people can get results a little sooner than that. But if they have to go for a test, again, we can share with them where those resources are available. But the testing itself would not be something that we would want to undertake or do. We'd want to send them to one of those community sites to have that done. And then hopefully they would receive a negative report and could return more quickly. It's going to be something that several of you have noted already. We're going to literally have to manage, in some cases, room by room and building by building. That is just the nature of what's taking place here. There is an advantage to that in that we could have an issue to deal with in one place and it not affect others. And the disadvantage is the amount of time and resource it will take to manage it at that level and make sure we're safely managing
One of the things I've also heard from parents too is that, and we've talked about how the data comes to us in 2 weeks, in past 2 weeks, and then 1 week falls off, and then they update the next week. And so instead of could we possibly consider that instead of a week, which I know, like you said, in some classrooms and some schools, it might change overnight and over a few days. But I've had some parents that have asked, could we do a 2 week, like a 2 week forecast, so they would know that, especially if it was just, if we were still on that roadmap of going 1 day or 2 days, that 2 week would help them a little bit better with planning as far as childcare and their work schedules and things like that. Or do you feel like we could get to that point and then address outbreaks or things like that as a separate issue?
Well, I think we could do that. Now, here would be the downside to it. If we had done that, for example, looking at the last 3 weeks' data, if we'd look a week at a time, I don't believe we could have shared with you as positive a picture a week ago as we were able to share with you today, because we'd not yet reached a low across those 2 measures of spread. So there's a downside to telling people too early. I think it could cause us to use an approach that's more restrictive than it would have to be.
Okay.
But we'll try to get that information out as soon as we can, because we know that families need that to plan ahead.
Right. All right. And I'm going to ask you probably the most question I get asked most often is the virtual, the parents that decided on virtual school, they had a choice, but the parents that want their children to go back full-time, 5 days a week, feel that they do not have a choice. And so why was that choice not, why was it, in the great scheme of things, it seems like that just offer 2 choices. Don't complicate it by all the other items, which we've seen from the data today that it is complicated. Mm-hmm. So why not just have a choice of all those that don't want to go, don't have to go, but the ones that want their children to be in school 5 days a week, why can't they go? And are we aware, is there any district in the state that is allowing a full-time back to school 5 day a week option for parents?
It's my understanding there's some school districts that are. Now, I cannot tell you the circumstances under which they do that. The bottom line to 5 days a week in our district,
yes, sir,
is we cannot protect our employees to the degree they need to be protected in this level of spread, because we cannot guarantee that we can maintain 6 feet of distance between those employees and students, and between and among students. So while certainly our primary focus is on students, we must also always be focused on the health and safety of our employees. And while students might experience less severe reactions to this virus, they're not totally immune for it, but while their reaction may be less severe, it is certainly can be extremely severe, small numbers for them, but in much larger numbers for our employees. And recognizing we have a large percentage that are in those age categories that are most susceptible. We're not able to accommodate everybody in that age category. They didn't all necessarily ask to go to virtual, but we don't have any virtual bus drivers or virtual custodial employees or virtual clerical people. We have to think about the protection of all of our employees, which I know that's what you want us to do. So while I understand the sentiment of some parents, I want my child in school 5 days a week, we also have a duty to protect our employees. And beyond that duty to protect them, if we put those employees in there 5 days a week with those students, and that COVID virus runs through there, even if it has no long-term negative health effect on those employees, they'll all be out quarantined and we'll be back at a zero by not managing it in a way that maintains everything that you read, see, or hear about this from public health and medical resources emphasizes mask and social distancing. And we know we can do those two things at a 1 or a 2. The only one we know we could do at a 5 is a mask. And even wearing a mask, if you're inside 15 minutes within 6 feet of somebody, then those COVID quarantine recommendations kick in.
Okay, and I think you hit on something there about the virtual, but also I know that we have a pool of substitute teachers that is limited, and I know that every year during even just flu season that it really puts a strain on us in that January, February timeframe when everyone comes back from holiday breaks and brings the flu and all different other types of crud with them, and it puts a strain on our normal system. But so it would, I can imagine it would definitely put a strain on our teacher pool. But we do we have any type of bus driver substitutes, custodian substitute, food service, our nurse substitutes, all those that have to be there every day to support our students? Do we have any type of pool of substitutes that could support those people?
Substitutes for taking their place in the event of their absence?
Yes, yes.
We have a very limited number. We have some in food service. We basically have none among the bus driver category. And the way we handle custodial building services absences, we have a very small number of substitutes. We usually manage that by overtime. So we might have, if we had, say, a custodian out in a particular school, we might have 2 other custodians work 4 hours overtime each in order to replace the 8 hours missing from the absent custodian. But we have insufficient numbers of substitute employees really throughout every job category.
Okay, all right. I think that was all of my questions. I thank you very much. Thank you for all the information that we've been given.
Thank you, Ms. Bush.
To our chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Great questions. At this time, Ms. Grayson and then Mr. Shamley. Ms. Grayson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want our kids to return to school as soon as possible. I mean, I understand that pediatricians are encouraging schools to open their doors or risk more developmental harm to kids. I understand that working parents, particularly mothers, are in crisis, worrying about having to leave work in the absence of a place to send their young children on the days they're not in school. I'm encouraged that the district is partnering with the community to alleviate some of these childcare concerns. And I also understand the consequences of closed or half-open schools. These are even greater than the brutal economic challenges facing working parents and their employers, because our schools do so much more than educate our kids. Schools also provide positive role models and mentors, meals, social connections, athletics, and mental and physical health services to our students. However, I do not want to be responsible for the spread of illness or death. None of us do. Federal and state leaders have invoked the Nike slogan, "Just do it," as if fully opening our schools and ensuring the safety of students and of employees were completely compatible. The CDC has advised us to make decisions that take into account the level of community transmission rates as determined by DHEC. We need a framework that will allow the administration to adjust to changing conditions. It would be irresponsible for this board to order schools to open or close. Even if we did, things could change tomorrow. The board meets twice a month, and it's the role of the superintendent and his staff to operate our schools on a daily basis. As Ms. Wells stated, board members are neither medical experts, public health officials, or school administrators. We need to allow the administration to base decisions on medical and scientific data rather than on the personal opinions of this board. This plan includes returning to a 5-day in-person instruction as soon as public health officials indicate that it is safe to do so, which is what we all want. So I encourage the board to support the administration's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grayson. Mr. Shamley.
Okay, I have a few questions and then I think a couple of suggestions. I want to thank Ms. Grayson for her comments because nobody anywhere in this group is an expert on anything. And I don't know that there's really a 100% expert anywhere in the country that knows what's going on with the COVID virus. It's been floating around. It's been unbelievably difficult for everybody around the world to deal with, and everybody has had a slightly different approach to it. I want to echo the comments that have been made several times and add my underlining to them, which is that the school board has done an outstanding, and I want to underline outstanding job of responding to this COVID virus. They did so in the spring, pretty much turned on a dime and pretty much kept things going all the way through the end of that school with the e-learning. They spent the whole summer working overtime to come up, excuse me, with a good plan for virtual learning if we need to do that. So I have a couple of questions, and these are not intended to be in any way knowledgeable. But if we go back to the chart that talks about the incidence of COVID, went high, increasing low, and all of that, I'm having just a little bit of difficulty figuring out some of these numbers. And maybe somebody, Dr. Oyster, somebody can help me with them. But if you take the 500 on July 19th, the number of folks that were in Greenville County showing a 2-week new incidence rate per 100,000. And then it says Greenville County 2-week average positive tests. Is there a difference in new incidence rates and new positive tests that I'm somehow or another missing there, because the numbers don't even come close to matching up the way I had them up? And let me just tell you why. For example, if we say we have 500 cases of 2-week new incidence rates per 100,000, that comes out to about 1/2 of 1%. And then when we come over to Greenville County 2 weeks, even though I suppose that's a different metric we're looking at, instead of 1/2 of 1%, it says 18.9%. And I'm using that one only because it's easier to do the math there. I'm having a little bit of trouble correlating all that together. Is there anybody that can explain that to me? Dr. Royster, maybe? Or anybody?
I think you might be correlating two somewhat unrelated numbers. The percent positive is if you were tested in that time period,
right,
and you had a positive test, you counted as one.
Right.
So the cumulative 18.9% was of all the single tests given, single persons tested, 18.9% of them were positive. However many that was, 18.9% of them were positive.
That would be.
If you go look at the other number, the new incidence rate, that takes the number per 100,000. So in our, roughly those two numbers are, I think the Greenville County population is a little over 500,000. So that would be what, around 2,500 total. So 500 per 100,000 population. So you're really, those are not, the numbers are somewhat related, but you cannot derive one from the other.
Yeah, and that's again why I'm asking. The Greenville County 2-week new incidence rate per 100,000 and the Greenville County 2-week average positive tests. I was curious what the difference is because the numbers are so far apart.
Right, and that's why I think, Shamley, they use that center measure as your indicator of whether you're going up, you're staying stable, or you're going down.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just curious why increasing high at 0.5% of new cases is the same as, or roughly the same as 18% positive. New cases, I assume, are cases that have been tested. Am I right, or am I missing it?
Yes, that would be my assumption as well.
So
it might help you to look at the slide before that, the one that we have up now, where it gives you the definition. A low is 0 to 50, medium is 51 to 200, and a high is greater than 201, equal to or greater than 201 per 100,000. They don't necessarily correlate that number with a percent positive. That's a separate calculation. So you have to look at the two columns. Though they are related, they are two separate calculations.
okay, I'm a one because the difference, the variation is just so high. I just am not sure how they're counting these things. That's made it difficult for me. If we go to the slide dealing with DHEC recommendations, and I don't have it in front of me, if I recall, it says that we keep social distance if possible. Am I reading that properly? I'm not sure if that's the right word. It says
yes, they say to the extent possible. Now, what all the medical and public health officials say is 6 feet in ordinary circumstances is what makes the difference.
Right.
6 feet and a mask.
Okay, am I correct? DHEC says, yeah, that's good if possible. And that's kind of what I'm zeroing in on. If I'm correct, DHEC is not mandating that there must be 6 feet separation. They're saying if it's possible, there should be 6 feet separation. And of course, the wearing of masks. And I guess that all kind of runs together.
But again, if you don't maintain that 6 feet, whether you've got a mask on or not, the DHEC guidance is if you're inside that 6 feet for 15 minutes or more, and that person that's inside that 6 feet with you tests positive, then you got to be quarantined too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, I'm having trouble with the word "if possible" because that seems to me that says, well, if it's not possible, then do other things. So that's a question.
It does. It would be nice if all of this were black and white.
Yeah.
But
and of course,
so what we've tried to do is take those things that would ensure, to the best of our ability to do so, the safety and protection of our students and our employees.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that it would be virtually impossible to guarantee 100% nobody ever gets sick. I mean, I think we all agree to that. And so I guess
no way to guarantee that in ordinary circumstances.
That's right. You're right. I don't know how we get to that, but if we move along a little bit, I saw where we've added these requests for the CARES Act funds.
Yes, sir.
And I'm just curious, did they pop up sort of suddenly, or
that's not part of this motion, right?
Hold on.
Yeah.
I think we've had a lot of questions about the motion. I do have questions about the motions.
Now, this is not these are not, we've got, Mr. Samley, if you look, we've got 2.2 that will talk about the CARES Act funds, and we've got 2.3.
That's not critical. And I guess this again, what I go back to and say again, there's been an absolutely tremendous effort by the school district to get these things worked out. And I don't have any major problems with any of them. But in the last couple of weeks, it's become increasingly evident from statements from experts. And of course, they all have a little catchphrase at the end that sort of protects them. But increasingly evident that one, children, particularly younger children, are suffering tremendously by not being in school. And I think everybody would agree to that. I think that's a fairly common sense thing. But everybody from WHO, CDC, Johns Hopkins, South Carolina, and National Pediatrics Associations all have been saying that. And then they all finish up saying, yeah, but you better do it carefully. Which tells me that if we do it and something happens, they said you didn't do it carefully. If we don't do it and something happens, they said you didn't do it at all. And I have a problem with that approach. But I think what they all do agree on is that there is a very serious problem for these young children. They also add that the rate of transmission of the infection among these very small children particularly, and I'm saying K through fifth grade. Some say all the way through high school. That's still out, I guess, for discussion. But I think universally they're saying that K through fifth grade, the transmission rates are extremely low. You even have that little situation where they have the MISC or whatever that's called, and that's even way lower. But I think the concern here is that some people are saying we are doing more damage than good to these children by keeping them out of school. And all of these studies seem to agree on that. The spread again appears to be coming down in Greenville County by some measures. It's coming down rather dramatically, I think, but certainly coming down. And at the least, it's plateaued in Greenville County. Again, yesterday, 7 days of cases reported are down. Hospital isolations are down. Positive cases are down. In fact, if you go on the cruise ships that were infected and they all had the same air conditioning system blowing the same air to every room, the infection rate was about 20%. We are now at about 15%. And I guess I know that DHEC may have its ideas on when is safe enough. Again, I'm going to say that that's very subjective. So again, without wanting to annoy anyone any more than necessary, and bear in mind that my suggestions here are completely serious, and they're based on several weeks of studying. My suggestion is this, and we can make it by motion to the amendment or amendment to the motion, or we can do it afterwards. I don't know how is the best way you'd like to do it, but here are my suggestions. Simply one. And I'm going to ask you again, Dr. Royster, did I hear you say that the Department of Education had said we must start schools by the 24th or 17th? Or did I mishear that? I wasn't sure.
Yeah. The caveat to our plan that was approved was that there must be some form of in-person instruction before September the 14th.
September the 14th.
Doesn't define how many days a week.
Okay.
Doesn't define how many hours per day. Doesn't define it beyond what I just said.
Yeah, and what I'm about to suggest, I don't think will require anybody going back to the Department of Education. But you said September the 14th. The date that I've been hearing from the governor and others was the day after Labor Day, which a lot of people are doing. And so my proposal would be that we start school on the day after Labor Day under the plans that are presented to us, with one exception, and that would be that K through 5th grade start back on a full-time schedule on the day after Labor Day, and it would be unless there has been a serious increase in incidents in Greenville County. And that would be my motion, if there is such a thing now or later, but that's my suggestion. And it's not just based on, wild conjecture. I've been following all of the reports. I've been listening to what people are telling me. And it seems to us, and it seems to me, I should say, and I haven't had meetings with any groups of people or anything like that. It seems to me that this would be a logical way to go. And I know people on both sides of the issue have concerns. My response simply is, if you don't like sending your kids back to school, that's fair. There's nothing weird, wrong, or otherwise inappropriate about that. That's okay. Don't send them back to school. Those who don't have that fear, who have any number of other issues that they need to deal with, I think we need to give them the option to send their children, at least their children, to school on a full-time basis. They're a lot easier to deal with in terms of working situations. On down the line it goes. So I would make that suggestion, and if it's appropriate to make it as an amendment or a motion to amend the current motion, that's fine. But that's what I'm asking.
Okay, so Mr. Shamley has made
he hasn't made a motion, and it's not germane to the motion we have on the floor.
Start date isn't?
I'm sorry?
Start date is not germane?
I don't, in the motion, I guess Mr. Webb, I'm sorry, Ms. Leventis Wells.
No, that's fine. Mr. Webb, can you address, please?
Well, may I recommend maybe, Mr. Shanley, you make a motion, then we can assess whether it's germane to the agenda item.
All right, I'll make it in two separate steps, if that's okay. The first one will be, I would move that all Greenville County schools start.
There's a motion on the floor already.
We already have a motion on the floor. This would be an amended motion.
Right.
That's not what he's saying. He's saying it's a motion.
It's a motion to amend what's on the floor. I don't know if it's appropriate to do it now. If it's not, then Mr. Webb, tell me and I'll wait and do it later. You decide.
This would be the time.
All right, so let me try that again. It is that all Greenville County schools will start on September 8th, 2020. It doesn't say whether they're full-time, 5 days or anything. It just says that that's when they'll start. Okay. And the reason I say that is right now, we're scheduled to start on the 24th. That gives at least 2 weeks of time for things to unfold for us to be able to finalize a little bit better detail on how we're going to proceed.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Shamley's out of order. He's speaking to a motion that hasn't been seconded.
That's correct. So Mr. Webb, I believe he's making an amended motion to our motion, and it would need a second for it to go anywhere. So Mr. Shamley has made an amended motion. Is there a second? Hearing no second, the motion is null and void.
Okay, so now I would make the second motion, and I don't.
It's an amended motion.
The second amended motion, and it is as follows. That elementary schools will start with the 5-day in-school schedule when schools start back. If necessary, well, I'll just leave it at that. That's the amended motion.
Okay, so there's an amended motion on the floor. Is there a second? Hearing no second, the motion fails. And we are back to the original motion on the floor.
Okay, and I think I still have the floor, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that then obviates the need for any other suggestions I would have made. But I think that we are moving forward, whether good or bad or otherwise, and I think it's good for us to move forward. So I'll defer to others on how we do that. So,
okay, so Dr. Royce, I just have a couple of questions, and then we're going to move on because our meeting has exceeded 3 hours. So with that being said, Dr. Royster, I'd like to make sure that children who have been under the care of DSS and have been monitored while they have been attending school and so forth, are we checking on these students that are home and in need of, meals and counseling and et cetera?
Yes, ma'am, but I think if you go back to the information I shared with you earlier, I believe we were only down to 54 students that we've not been able to be in contact with. And that would have continued, that effort has obviously continued over the summer. We're continuing to provide meals at multiple locations through fans. And again, when school starts, we would monitor those individuals to make sure they've reconnected with school or find out what happened to them if they don't. Maybe they've enrolled somewhere else. That goes to a question that was asked earlier, but yes, we continue to monitor those. While I appreciate some of the generic information that's been assumed and generated by people out in the public, I think we and other school districts stand as exceptions to having followed up with all of our students, whether they were present in the building or not, and trying to help ensure that they had the services and support they needed to have, even if they were not physically present. Not as good as being in school. It's certainly not as good as being in school. But I think that we had folks at the building level and at the district level who made tremendous effort and accomplished, to a great extent, continuing to stay connected with students and helping them and assisting them in things they needed help with and their families.
Dr. Royster, do we have social workers on hand that will go out and check on students as well?
Yes.
When they start school and continue to check on them?
Yes. Now, they may or may not go inside the home. They may first try to make telephone contact, then they might make contact outside of the home at the home. But we'd want to be very cautious. Our social workers and attendance workers routinely make home visits, but in the time of this pandemic, we'd want to be very cautious with those employees actually going inside a home. So they might have a conversation on the porch or in the front yard, where normal circumstances, they might have that conversation inside.
Will there be nurses on all the campuses when school starts back? Okay.
There are nurses assigned to every campus that we have, and we currently have some nurse vacancies, I believe, and we're working to fill those now.
Okay. And then just one bit of information. You will get your results back in 2 to 3 days. and it is free because they were on our campuses, East Side, Travelers Rest, and I was at Travelers Rest. So with that being said, we will move forward with the motion on the floor. All in favor, any questions? All in favor, please address by raising your right hand. All oppose, your right hand. The motion carries.
Thank you.
Now we will go, Dr. Royster will move to 2.02, request for use of CARES Act funds for virtual program technology support and COVID-related expenses.
Madam Chairman,
Yes, sir, Mr. Saylor.
I make a motion to approve the recommendation.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor to recommend the request for the use of CARES Act funds for virtual program technology support and COVID-related expenses. It was seconded by Mr. Meek. Any questions? All those in favor, please address by raising your right hand. All those opposed, raise your right hand. The motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. 2.03 personnel. Recommended motion from the administration to approve the personnel recommendations as presented.
Madam
Chair, I move for the approval.
I'll second.
The motion was approved and seconded to approve the personnel recommendations as presented. Any questions? All those in favor?
Are we in executive session? I may have missed that. Are we in executive session?
No, we are not in executive session.
Well, if I'm correct, aren't we supposed to be?
Only if you have a question, Mr. Shamley, then we certainly would defer you all to go into executive session.
Okay.
What I would request that you do, if you want to consider doing that, is to let Mr. Carlin give his report and then do executive session at the very end.
No, I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure we hadn't missed a step, so that's fine.
No.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
May I request on those last two very important votes, since you asked for a hand vote and the public is not aware of that vote, is it correct for the record that both of those votes were unanimous?
It was, I do believe everyone raised their right. No, there.
Madam Chairman, Madam Chairman, the first vote was 11-1.
Yes.
Okay.
The second one was 12-0.
Okay, so the second one was unanimous, and the first one was 11-1. Okay.
The second one was the one relating to CARES Act funds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that's fine.
And that was 12 in favor.
And that was the first one was then the
11-1.
11-1, and that was
Yes.
on the returning to school.
Right.
Do we have a vote on the start time? I thought we did for that as well.
No, we did not have that.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, so we're at 2.03. If there are any questions for the personnel pertaining, then we know there are no questions. So with that being said, there's a motion and there's a second. All those in favor, please address by raising your right hand and make sure everybody can see your right hand on the screen. Okay. All right. All those opposed, raise your right hand. I see 12 right hands, so the motion carries. 3.01, facilities project update. This is information only. Mr. Carlin, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Carlin? Anyone have any questions? Hearing none, Mr. Carlin, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, ma'am.
I'd like to thank you for your report. Thank you. And at this time, I will enter, Dr. Royster.
If I might, Ms. Leventis Wells, I simply want to extend my appreciation to the trustees and to the board for your support throughout this process. It's extremely challenging and difficult. I know you all are well aware of that, and I appreciate the support that you all have shown through this process, your thoughtful consideration of the things that we've shared with you, and your approval of the framework allowing us to move forward. It's a difficult time for you all as elected officials, and I certainly appreciate your willingness to lead out there and take into consideration the best interest of our students and the best interest of our employees. Thank you again.
I'd like to thank you all for being here, and now I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Madam
Mr.
Chairman,
Meek. Yes, Mr. Meek.
make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second the motion.
Mr. Sadeth, second the motion. Any questions? Hearing none, all in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, raise your right hand. The motion carries. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you and have a safe day. Dr. Royster? Okay, we're good.